I think that was the first minute. I think I'm ready just to start this meeting. Welcome everybody watching this webinar on antibiotic resistance, a silent threat in a noisy pandemic era. This event is arranged by the Nordic Council, which is the official body for the cooperation in the Nordic regions, which involves Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, the Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Åland. My name is Mette Frobenius. I'll be the host or the moderator for the next 2 hours. Normally I do stand-up comedy or radio, and I have a master degree in law and business as a background for doing these things. I have the last 10 or 15 years done a lot of talks and debates, especially about the European Union. I know all of you have read the program. The World Health Organization has identified antibiotic resistance as one of the biggest threats to health of the world's population. Recent studies indicate that in Europe alone, an estimated 33,000 people will die each year due to antibiotic resistance. So we need to act, and we need to act now, and we need to act together. The next 2 hours, we will focus not only on the challenges, but also on the solutions to this global health crisis. You will meet speakers from all over Europe, and you will meet speakers with very different professions. You will meet people from the Nordic Council, you will meet European Parliament members, you will meet people working in healthcare, professors, people working in the pharmaceutical industry, and they will speak from different places in Europe, because that's one of the advantages about a webinar, that we have people talking from Tromsø in Norway, we have one from Uppsala in Sweden, and we will of course also visit Brussels in Belgium. We would like that this webinar is a dialogue, and therefore all of you participants, you can either ask a question or make a comment. Those of you that are from the Nordic Council or the European Parliament, you can use the raise hand function, and the rest of you can write your question or your comment in the chat forum here on this webinar. With me on a safe distance here in Copenhagen, I have Line Karlskov Jensen. She's a senior advisor at the Nordic Council, and she will help me as a kind of gatekeeper and also help me to check the questions and comments that are coming in, and also make sure that the comments and questions stay within the subject of this webinar, which is antibiotic resistance. I guess you all know by now how this webinar works. There are no official breaks, so if you need a coffee or a sandwich or to stretch your legs, just whatever, do it. We will not wait for you. You can just go ahead and do it yourself. Remember to speak slowly when you have the stage or the screen. I know that all of you are very eager to share your knowledge, but this webinar will contain a lot of technical terms, and we are a lot of different nationalities joining today. So take us by the hand and speak slow, so we are sure that we get all the things you want to say. We have a very tight schedule. I will try to be strict but fair. So if I can hear that one of you speakers are about to spend more time than you have, you will hear this sound. And that is not a cheer, unfortunately. It means that your time is running out and you should end your speech. With all these practical informations, I would like to say welcome to this webinar on antibiotic resistance for the next 2 hours. And I would like to welcome the first speaker. She is chair of the Committee for Welfare in the Nordic region, the Nordic Council. Welcome to Bente Stein Mathisen. Bente, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for your introduction. I would also like to welcome you all to this webinar on antibiotic resistance. Back in 2018, when the Committee for Welfare in the Nordic region last met for a seminar on antibiotic resistance, the world looked quite different. At the time, the WHO had declared antibiotic resistance to be one of the world's biggest health crises. We were already talking about the potential risk of dying of pneumonia, because we might no longer be able to treat it with antibiotics. Since then, the world has changed. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us how essential antibiotics are when treating COVID patients. Not the virus itself, but the other infections, such as pneumonia, which the patients often have. In other words, These two health risks are connected. They are forcing us to take immediate action, ideally yesterday. Antibiotic resistance is often referred to as the medical word's climate crisis. Just as nature's resources are limited, antibiotics too are a limited resource. The consequences of antibiotic resistance are colossal. Even without the pandemic, they could be totally devastating to world health. At worst, our generation's overconsumption could prevent future generations from benefiting from antibiotics. In 2017, the Nordic Council published a white book outlining 12 concrete proposals from Nordic initiatives in the fight against antibiotic resistance. One of the white book's proposals was to give incentives to the developers. The idea was to introduce financial incentives and better framework for making new antibiotics and vaccines. This would take place through Nordic and international cooperation. A key aspect was that this should make use of public-private partnerships. Since then, the pandemic has clearly shown how important this way of working is. The result of rising antibiotics resistance paints a gloomy picture. Operations and transplants could become impossible. Even simple diseases could become deadly. But with political will, cooperation, responsibility, and leadership, we can change this. We in the Nordic region have a weighty responsibility. We must take the lead in this fight and act as a pioneer for the rest of Europe. But we cannot do it alone. Antibiotic resistance is a global challenge and should be handled in a global perspective. It's here that the Nordic region, alongside the EU, can be a driving force. This fight is not new. It's my hope that this webinar will enable us to exchange new knowledge and experience, and with it to take one step closer to concrete political, practical, and strategic action. For a year, the eyes of the world have been on the COVID-19 pandemic, but the quiet, persistent danger of antibiotic resistance still lurks on the horizon. Like the climate crisis, these problems are man-made. Only we, humanity, can solve them. If we do nothing now, the economic cost, and even worse, the cost in human life, could be much higher than anything COVID-19 comes close to. Thank you for your attention. I hope you all have an interesting and rewarding webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bente. Even though some of it was a little pessimistic, it is also good to hear that there's actually some kind of hope if we work together and try to solve this. And again, we have a webinar about the antibiotics resistance. And as we said in the beginning, being resistant to antibiotics is a silent threat to healthcare all over the world and also to Europe. The next speaker will elaborate that. Welcome to Professor from Uppsala University from Sweden, Åsa Melhus. Welcome, Åsa.
Thank you very much. I'll see if I'm able here to share my screen. Oh, here we go. Oops. Infectious diseases have accompanied us since our first evolutionary steps. Up until the 19th century, about 50% of the human population died from infectious diseases. And with the industrialization, we got wealthier and also healthier. And the feet, by the way, are Danish and at least 500 years old, and they are deformed by leprosy. At the beginning of the 20th century, we had half the death rate in infectious diseases. But as you can see, we have lowered it even further. And we got antibiotics, the first one, 1935. And then we had halved it again. So antibiotics is not the only way of getting rid of infections. But as you can see, now we are on the 21st century, and there is a very low death rate. So the question is, what do we die from? Well, the 10 top causes of death, according to WHO, is what we call old man diseases, like ischemic heart disease and stroke. But as number 4 and as number 8, you find infections. And also, I think under point 5, neonatal conditions, you can find some infections here. And to get rid of these infections, we need antimicrobials. There are 2 types of antimicrobial substances, pharmaceuticals and biocides, and we use both, especially in hospitals. Every time we use any of these substances, we can select for resistance. Here you have a picture showing how the selection can happen. You have a lot of bacteria in an infection, and 1 or 2 of the cells are resistant. If I start treating this patient with antibiotics or biocides, something will happen. The resistant bacteria will be selected, and at the end, the population will mainly consist of resistant bacteria. And this can go really fast. It can happen during treatment. We have been doing this selection for over 50 years, and now we are seeing the backlash of using antibiotics. We have multiresistant or even panresistant bacteria. And panresistant means that we have no option whatsoever to treat. The year 2013, American physicians were asked if they had been in contact with patients with panresistant bacteria. 60% said yes. And I remember myself when I first saw a totally resistant bacterium, and that was in 1999. It was awful. It was filled with struggle and suffering, and after a year, this poor patient died, and he was only about 30, and he had been transplanted with a new kidney. And when you've seen this once, you don't want to see this anymore. Just a year after the first questionnaire in the United States, researchers looked into the situation by modeling. And this is the picture they came up with. This is what it will look like in the year 2050 if we don't do anything about it. And as you can see, the death rates are high all over the world, and they far exceeds the COVID-19 death rates. And we think these are awful. But we are not here yet. This is more what it looked like 2 years ago. And as already mentioned by the former speaker, about 33,000 people die in Europe every year due to resistance among bacteria. But it's not the same all over Europe. There are differences, and here we need to help each other to make it look like at the end of this picture. Iceland has a very good situation, but other countries have a much worse one. Antibiotic resistance is not due to humans. It's at least 2.2 billion years old. But the frequency of resistant genes has clearly increased in the soil sediments during the last half of the 20th century. And this is not a natural phenomenon. It's caused by human activity. The first time researchers connected resistance among human pathogens to resistance among bacteria in the soil was in 1973. But we did not draw any conclusions, and we only stared at human pathogens for another 30 years, unfortunately. And that's why we are in the situation we are in now. We know now that the environment is an enormous reservoir for resistance genes, and we call it the soil resistome. And here, it's like eBay. The bacteria can buy whatever they need for their survival. And this eBay is huge. Absolutely huge. The genes from the resistome has all the time it flows through different types of systems. So you get genes from the natural environments and from a human activity to the natural environments. And we have certain hotspots where the mobilization and transfer of genes are especially high, like in hospitals, among agriculture, in antibiotic production, and so forth. So we need to find these hotspots and see what we can do to decrease the mobilization and the transfer. A lot of really nice little bacteria that we need have become really nasty. And we have different types of gram-negatives and gram-positives that are now problem bacteria. And what they have in common is that they are all apt to adapt. If we put the selective pressure on them, they prefer to become resistant. And now we have so much problem that we don't really know what to do. The map you can see to the right is depicting the situation when it comes to Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And as you know, microorganisms do not respect national borders. So even if it looks pretty nice in Europe, it can become much, much worse. And all the coloring from light yellow to dark red depicts multi-resistant or extensively drug-resistant Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And I conclude, or rather, I let the WHO conclude that this antimicrobial resistance is one of the top 10 global public health threats. It requires urgent multi-sectoral action, so we cannot use only people in one country or only look at human isolates. We have to look at the whole picture. And misuse, overuse of antimicrobials are the main drivers, but I would say only use can be a driver. Lack of clean water, sanitation, inadequate infection prevention or control promotes the spread. The cost to the economy is significant. You have death, disability, prolonged illness, longer hospital stays, need for more expensive medicines, and a lot of financial challenges. Without effective antimicrobials, the success of modern medicine in treating infections, including during major surgery and cancer chemotherapy, would be at increased risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Åsa. And I actually have a question for you, so please stay connected. When people signed up for this webinar, they had a possibility of asking questions on email, and some did. And one of the questions is from the Czech Republic, and I think it would be a good question to start asking you, Åsa. It's from Dubravka Kastalova, and the question is, how serious is the risk of returning to pre-antibiotic era now, more severe than in the time before the COVID-19 pandemic? So where are we if we also include the COVID-19 pandemic?
We are not better off than we were before the COVID pandemic. I would say we are even worse. We have not used infection control measures because our intensive care units have been filled with patients. So we have actually caused a lot of infections in our hospitals. So we need to go back to what it used to be and even do better.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Dubravka Kostalova for asking the question before we even started the webinar. But we will move on. We have now we now all know that this is something we have to fight together and not each country alone. So therefore, I would like to introduce to you the next speaker. She is Deputy Head of Cabinet Kyriakides in the European Commission, and she will give an overview on the EU actions in the fight against antibiotic resistance. Anuka Oyala, welcome to you.
Thank you very much, and it's really my pleasure to be here today to discuss with you the silent threat of antibiotic resistance. As the world now continues to fight COVID-19, which is really the priority, and it's all we see in the press everywhere, every day, and that's really the focus. However, it's essential that we remain vigilant and committed to actions on AMR. As you will discuss in the second part of this meeting in the afternoon, the pandemic is expected to prompt a rise in AMR worldwide, as antibiotics are widely used to treat secondary infections in COVID patients. It's therefore essential that we urgently introduce concrete changes on the way we use antimicrobials in today's society. We must continue to work together to ensure that we do not roll out from one global health catastrophe into the next one. Antimicrobial resistance is one of the Commission's priorities in the area of health. In its action, the Commission is focusing on the full implementation of the EU's One Health Action Plan, which contains over 70 actions. And of course, we are also working closely with our international partners to advocate a global agreement on the use of and access to antimicrobials. And this is a very significant task, and we will be counting on full support of the member states, the European Parliament, stakeholders, and of course our international partners. Antimicrobial resistance, as we all know and discuss, it requires comprehensive action, and we are really fully committed to this health in all policies approach, spanning from animal and environment to human health sectors. And to frame our discussion today, I would like to quickly mention some of the key steps that we have taken at EU level. First, the EU's One Health Action Plan defined a broad agenda to our work and has already delivered some important results. Amongst these actions, I would like to mention the support we give to the development and implementation of national action plans on AMR. We are also new rules on veterinary medicines and medicated feed are another very significant step towards ensuring antimicrobials are used responsibly in animals, and in certain cases reserved for human use only. And these rules will apply from next year. Also, the EU guidelines on prudent use of antimicrobials in human medicine have also helped to raise awareness. So these actions that I just mentioned will help preserve effective antimicrobials to the future. At the same time, we must continue to build a robust evidence base on AMR. And here we're working closely with our agencies, so the Food Agency, medicine agencies, and also the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. And this analysis and data that these agencies are putting forward in, for example, in the recently published ESVAC report and the ECDC's annual report, provide very essential data that allow us to build our policies on AMR. And they also show that the sales and consumption of antibiotics still vary very widely among the different countries in Europe, and even more so, obviously, globally. More so, we are working on substantial funding for research that's been made available under the Horizon program. On the environmental side, we have the EU strategic approach to pharmaceuticals in the environment that paves the way for another set of important actions. And on the human health side, we have the EU's joint actions that have strengthened cooperation among the countries and help raise public awareness, including on the link between vaccination and reducing demand for antimicrobials. More broadly, we have promoted cooperation in the international arena, including the G7 and G20, and of course also in our international trade agreements. And we will continue to make this a high priority in the coming years. In this context, I may just mention the recent declaration from the G20 leaders, and also the health ministers of the G7 are now discussing, under the UK presidency, are discussing clear commitments to stronger action against AMR to be adopted with a resolution this summer. And all of these steps are, of course, very important, but as acknowledged with other speakers already, we still have a very long way to go. But many of the lessons learned from COVID are also relevant for AMR. First, the prevention is better than cure. So antibiotics must be used correctly and prudently, supported by strict infection prevention and control measures. And here we have learned a lot in the context of the COVID care. Secondly, we are stronger together. Both for COVID and AMR, they both call for united approach across policies, across countries, across all levels of society. And thirdly, global health threats call for global solutions. We must take steps to prevent AMR worldwide and support the right environment to develop new antimicrobials. AMR is also firmly integrated in the other key Commission initiatives, taking a true One Health approach. And I'll just give some examples on this. First, we have the Farm to Fork strategy that was adopted last spring. And here we introduce target to reduce overall EU sales of antimicrobials for farmed animals and aquaculture by 50% by 2030, since sustainable food systems require responsible use of antimicrobials in the food chain. Secondly, we have a pharmaceutical strategy for Europe that also addresses challenges in this area. Flagship actions include the review of the pharmaceutical legislation to further restrict and optimize the use of antimicrobial medicines and explore new types of incentives for innovative antimicrobials. We will also pilot innovative approaches to research and development and public procurement, aiming to provide pull incentives for novel antimicrobials and optimize the use of existing regulatory tools. Thirdly, Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. As already mentioned here, cancer patients are more exposed to life-threatening infections and are more vulnerable when antimicrobials do not work. So this is also an important part of this work. Fourth, we have the new EU for Health funding program that will fund actions on AMR, for example, to strengthen stewardship and infection prevention and control. Finally, the European Health Union package adopted last November aims at strengthening our capacities for preparedness and response to health crisis, which will also strengthen our response to AMR. This package announces the setting up of a European Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority, HERA, to enable the EU and its member states to rapidly deploy the most advanced medical measures in the event of major threats. And AMR is, of course, it's a prime example of such a threat, and will be one of the focus areas of preparatory action that the Commission will launch now in the parallel of the impact assessment this year. And to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, the next few years are critical. We need to double our efforts, both domestically and internationally, to ensure future generations can benefit from effective antimicrobial treatments. It's everyone's responsibility and should be everyone's priority to bring lasting change against antimicrobial resistance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we have a question for you, actually. And for all of you participating, remember that you can ask questions in the Q&A. And Anuka, if you want to read the question, I'm going to read it out loud as well. You can do it if you press the Q&A, and it's directed to you. And it's from Helle Aagaard. She's from the REACT Action on Antibiotic Resistance, and she's the director. The global agreement on access and use of antimicrobials was announced when the new Commission came in. How has the the European Commission concretely been advancing a global agreement? How has the European Commission concretely been advancing a global agreement since then? And what is planning going forward? And that is to you, Anuka.
Thank you very much for this question. Of course, let's say the COVID has taken a precedence a bit on our, let's say, immediate work plans and the focus we have had in the last months and weeks for the last year. But on the AMR front, as said, that's something that we cannot lose sight of, and we absolutely need to work on that. Here we have now the International Leaders Group, which is convened under the WHO and OIE and FAO. So this is, I think, really the optimal setting, bringing the different sides of the equation, so the food, the animals, the human health together. And we are very much following now the work of this leaders group and see how we can how this work could eventually bring us towards an agreement. We are discussing, of course, and are in close contact with the different UN organization, and of course also discussing with member states and others. We to come, let's say, for the timing's exact step, this is still work very much in progress. So I cannot give at this point, let's say, exact timeline, but we will be very much relying, of course, now that this tripart work that has started in the auspices of UN, that will really be, let's say, for us the key group and mechanism that can hopefully support us towards working towards this agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anuka, for your answer. And we're going to move on. Remember that you can ask questions, all of you participating in the Q&A. We're going to go from the European Committee to the European Parliament, where we have Margrethe Auken, a Danish member. She's been a member for quite a while. So she knows not only to make the rules, but also to see when the rules are actually followed and implemented in the national legislations all over Europe. So Margrethe, you're going to talk about the European perspectives and concerns, the next steps and action. We would very much like to hear what are we going to do from now. Margrethe, welcome to you, and you are muted. You have to unmute.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, and thank you to you and to everybody. You know, I always love to be in this Nordic context. I was a very enthusiastic and very active member of the Nordic Councils from the Danish Parliament during the whole 80s, almost 10 years. And well, that was where I learned that we have to be in favor of the EU, because it's so difficult to make decisions who are really binding in the Nordic cooperation. And that is still what we hope to be able to do here in the European Parliament. And I will focus my 5 minutes on, well, you can hear a little bit of the same as you just heard, recent EU actions, but including key priorities and what we're going to do. In June 27, the Commission adopted the EU One Health Action Plan against AMR. And it was motivated by the need for the EU to play a leading role in the fight against the AMR. The key objectives of this plan are built on three main pillars: making the EU a best practice region, boosting research, development and innovation, and shaping the global agenda. On 25th of November 2020, the Commission adopted the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe that will address several AMR challenges, including the lack of investment in antimicrobials, and inappropriate use of antibiotics. Moreover, the strategy will also cover actions on improving healthcare professionals and European citizens' awareness on antimicrobial resistance. The EU for Health 2021 to 2027 program was presented, representing the EU response to COVID-19, which has had a major impact on medical and healthcare staff, patients, and health systems in Europe. By investing 5.1 billion euros, this program is the largest health program ever in monetary terms. EU for Health provides funding to EU countries, health organizations, and NGOs, including urgent health priorities that are reducing the number of antimicrobial resistance infections and improving vaccination rates. In May 2020, the European Commission also adopted the Farm to Fork, as you just heard, the strategy, a tool to help shape the EU path towards sustainable food system. Its objective is reduction, as you also heard, by 50% of the overall EU sales of antimicrobials for farmed animals in agriculture by 2030. The Parliament is still to begin its work on these comprehensive and important files, but the fight against antimicrobial resistance will be central in all of the above mentioned. The Parliament also has its own dedicated AMR interest group working to ensure that the EU and its member states deliver on their commitments and implement effective actions at EU, national, and regional level. Sorry. Back in...
Remember, your time is running out, Margrethe. I know you speak for 15 minutes, but you have 1 minute left.
Absolutely. Well, I will then just... Well, I could see that, just to sum up quickly then, sorry, that the Commission has, we are really working on, against the backdrop of a zero pollution ambition that the new Commission seeks to achieve within the framework of a European Green Deal. And we hope that the environmental impact of pharmaceutical manufacturing and pollution will be addressed. And we need binding measures to mitigate the impact of pharmaceuticals in the environment throughout their entire life cycle. And secondly, information of awareness raising is also important, particularly in Farm to Fork strategy and the transition to more sustainable foods. And I'll stop it here because I can feel from you that I have to stop here.
I know you. Normally when we do EU debates, I get close to you and I put my hand on your shoulder. So you know that you have to kind of stop talking. Thank you very much, Margrethe Augen. And thank you also for for cheering up and participating in the Nordic cooperation before you joined the European Parliament. And actually, that's quite a good bridge to the next speaker, because we came from the European Parliament and talking about also the Nordic Council and the Nordic regions, what they can do. But now it's time to listen to the next speaker. She will talk about, can the EU learn from the Nordic fight against antibiotic resistance? And it is a member of the ENVI committee from the European Parliament. Welcome to Jessica Polfjeld. Welcome to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Mette. Thank you, and hello from Sweden.
Hello.
And thank you for this important discussion that we.
Sorry to interrupt you. There is something with your microphone that it's scratching. Do you have a? Can you do something? Is it your laptop or your headset or? Wait.
I tried to remove the headset. Maybe it's better now. Is it better?
We can hear you, but there's still some kind of scratch. I don't know. Kasper, you're the technical.
Well, just a quick message. It says that your bandwidth, your broadband connection is bad. So maybe if you could move on and then try and reconnect.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Jessica. Hit it.
Yeah, I'm in the countryside of Sweden, so I guess that's the reason why. And as Margaret, I've always also been a member of the Nordic Council, and I also had the possibility to serve as president for a while. And that has given me a lot of experience and joy, of course, and experiences and knowledge to bring into my work in the European Parliament. And I think it's very important that the Nordic Council goes on with its struggle to raise this issue, because I know you have done so for a long time and a long period of time, and I think it's important to keep on and move on this discussion, and therefore it's good to have this conversation that we're going to have today, a silent threat, and I think that captures the situation that we are in. And AMR is already taking a devastating toll in human lives in the EU and globally. And yes, I think it's still relatively little knowledge about it, and I think that shows also that this conversation is need to happen. And I've been asked to offer some thoughts on what the EU can learn from the Nordics in terms of addressing AMR, and I would like to point out a few areas. And the first thing I would like to highlight is our holistic view on antimicrobial resistance. And I know that might sound a bit basic, but I think it's an important aspect of fighting AMR in general health promotion that reduces infections and the need to use antibiotics in the first place. So we should not underestimate these preventive measures. Vaccines and strict sanitary protocols reduce the usage of antibiotics and risk related to AMR. And the second is the responsible usage of antibiotics. In this area, I would like to highlight our Nordic farmers. And we know that it's a success in avoiding antibiotics in animal farming. And for 10 years straight now, Swedish farmers have used the least antibiotics in the EU. And Finland and Denmark are also doing very well in this regard. And this shows that it's possible to decrease the use of antibiotics in the animal sector. And to achieve the EU level, it is important that all countries follow the rules that we have in place. But we also have a responsibility as Nordic countries to share our best practices. And thirdly, I would like to highlight that we have seen in many Nordic initiatives that have informed policy in this area. And this should also include our strong international engagement, including our work through the WHO. And I think that we in the Nordic regard punch above our weight, and that can be an inspiration for other EU members. So there are certainly areas where the Nordics can lead by example. But I also believe that the EU can learn from its own experiences and achievements. In particular, there are important lessons that can be drawn from a response to the pandemic. And I think we should, of course, be mindful that this is still a developing situation. and we are all aware of the challenges in terms of vaccine production and distribution. But I think the big silver lining here is the development of so many vaccines in such a short time. And from this experience, I think we can draw some important lessons that will be important when it comes to addressing the challenge presented by AMR. A few things came to my mind. And one is that we need to build momentum for AMR prevention to make some noise and draw attention to it. And another is the need for an innovative European pharmaceutical strategy and industry. Without them, we could not have no vaccines or any other medicines. And related to this, of the importance of a strong science network in the EU, I think this also requires funding of research. And finally, I think the development of vaccines in such a short time shows the importance of good cooperation between policymakers and the private sector. And I hope that we will keep these lessons in mind once we turn to challenges such as AMR. And I believe that the first step is a good dialogue. And I look forward to this discussion. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Jessica. It turned out that we could actually hear basically almost all of it with your internet connection. And now I'm going to put on the last speaker, and when the final speaker for this first hour is John, then all of you are really welcome to ask questions. Put them to us in our question and answer here. Down below your screen, you should be able to see it, and you can ask questions to any of the speakers that you've been listening to in this first hour. But we have to go to Norway now, because the last speaker in the first hour is going to talk about what knowledge gained from the pandemic can we use in the fight against antibiotic resistance. And we're going to go to the University of Tromsø in Norway and talk to Professor Gunnar Skov Simonsen. Gunnar, welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And remember that you are the last speaker, and then we have hopefully a lot of questions coming in. So I'm going to be rather strict on you according to time.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, thank you for the invitation. I work as a clinical microbiologist up in Tromsø, but I'm also in charge of the Norwegian surveillance program for AMR, and I work closely with ECDC and WHO. So I'll try to give you a perspective on this question of what knowledge from the pandemic can we use in the fight against antibiotic resistance. And it's actually quite a challenging title, because in a way, it seems like the whole world is upended now due to the pandemic, but it will be very difficult to predict how the world will look in 3 years' time, whether all these novelties and new ways we're working, whether that will pass or whether it will actually affect some kind of long-term change. And I'll try to share some thoughts about that. So, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a very strong fear of increased need for treatment of bacterial infections secondary to the COVID-19 epidemic. And in many countries, there were actually reports that you had a lot of secondary infections, and naturally, if the bacteria were resistant, you would have a lot of problems with AMR. It turned out that these reports have not really come to any kind of fruition, in the sense that it appears that secondary bacterial infections is not that dramatic part of the disease picture as we initially feared. So to a large extent, we now realize that a lot of the pathogenicity and disease associated with COVID-19 is actually due to the virus itself and the immune system responding to it. Another initial problem, which is still lingering, is that all specialist resources which we normally draw upon in our work against AMR have been redirected towards COVID-19. And this goes for the clinical staff, the infectious disease specialists, it goes to the infection control officers, and it goes to, not the least, the microbiology laboratories, which are completely swamped in COVID-19 diagnostics. Finally, we had a very strong initial response linked to the use of specific antibiotics to even influence the clinical course of COVID-19 itself. And specifically, one antibiotic was purported to be effective for the treatment and ameliorate the clinical course of the disease. And that initial claim has later been refuted, to the sense that I believe it's now widely recognized that this is a viral infection, and antibiotics actually do not play any part except for the cases when a secondary infection arises. So these were the initial experiences. Then let's look at what kind of data we actually ended up with. It's very interesting. If you look at consumption data, antibiotic use data, it's in the Nordic countries is actually a fairly consistent picture that we see. These are data from Denmark, where we can see the number of antibiotic prescriptions per 1,000 children of the 0 to 4 year age. And we can see that 2020 actually has a significant drop. There is a seasonal variation, but it kind of goes to a much lower level than we have seen in previous years. If we look to Sweden, it's pretty much the same picture. Here we can see different years in different colors, and we can see that it's fairly stable over the year, a little fluctuations. There is a small decline from 2017 to 18 to 19. And then in March 2020, something happens. There is a dramatic drop in the consumption of antibiotics. This is for patients in primary care. And finally, if we look to Norway, the upper panel here shows the total antibiotic sales, where we can see that throughout 2019, it was fairly stable. And again, there maybe was a peak in March 2020, maybe some storage of excess and extra antibiotics, and then suddenly a drop. And the same happened if we look at prescriptions in primary care. There was a huge drop when we came to March. So at least in a Nordic context, it seems like the pandemic has resulted in a situation with reduced antibiotic use. We will see if that persists, and it may not be applicable to other countries around the world, but the data are not in yet. I don't have a lot of AMR data, but if we look at the situation in Norway, where we look at these very, very resistant bacteria, again, 2020 actually represents an improvement of what we have seen over recent years. And I believe that strongly shows how important travel is for our low resistance areas. So when travel is restricted, we actually have a drop in resistance. So I think even though we will return to some level of more normal settings with more travel, at least we can here in a kind of a large scale experiment show how important travel is for the AMR situation in our part of the world. So I think we have some new opportunities against AMR linked to the COVID-19 situation. There is a dramatically increased interest in infections, in epidemiology, and in public health. And I believe in Norway, as well as in countries around the world, all of a sudden we have kind of headlines related to epidemiology and public health. And everybody knows something about the R number or the appearance of mutants and what have you. So I think it's a huge public education in areas which are also relevant for AMR. In many countries, there has been a huge investment in rapid diagnostics, and that is one of the crucial elements which we have often been missing when it comes to AMR. There is too much focus on empirical treatment and too little of actually making a sound diagnosis. And I think there is, again, an opportunity of what we have seen over these last months. Infection control and prevention has gained a totally new status within the healthcare systems, and that is again a very, very welcome change. It's been a difficult area to work with, and now it's much better. And finally, breakthroughs in vaccine development could have a lasting effect because we have developed whole new areas of knowledge. So without overstating it, there are some limitations as well. There is a huge difference between a viral infection from a zoonotic organism to a bacterial infection. AMR will never disappear, and we will have to use antibiotics. And I think also we should caution that infection control and prevention is something, it's perceived as a burden, and fatigue will set in over time. In this final slide, I will just say that in this kind of a balance between optimism and pessimism, I'm actually I have a cautious optimism that the COVID-19 experience will actually be a benefit to us, or at least has some potential for us in the work when going forward on AMR, because we have kind of been able to focus some areas which have been under-focused and under-stimulated. And specifically, I believe diagnostics, vaccines, and public awareness around these issues will be something we can utilize in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gunnar. And the reason why I gave you a ding is that we have a lot of questions coming in for you. And I heard you saying that the fact that we travel less is good. That's one of the only things I've heard that not being able to travel is good for. I think all of us miss a lot being able to travel as we want to. We have some questions, and I'm going to gather 3 of the comments and questions to you, Gunnar, and then I would like you, Jessica, to be aware that you're going to be given the same questions. And it's about the use of antibiotics to humans. We have a question from Estonia, and it's from Jonna Story. And she asks, pharmacologists have known about this for over 30 years, the antibiotic resistance. When will antibiotic be treated as medication of last resort? When will it be the last thing you use? And also, you're going to get one more, Gunnar, from Helle Ågaard. She asks, what can the EU do to bring down misuse and overuse of antibiotics by humans? And I can tell also that we had another comment from Ellen Trane-Nørby that also took the same up. We humans use too much antibiotics. What can we do about that?
Well, these are big and difficult questions. Please remind me, the first one, that was about?
The first one was pharmacologists have known about this for over 30 years. When will antibiotics be treated as medication of last resort?
Yeah, I think that there are fundamentally different attitudes when it comes to how to look at antibiotics between different countries and different cultures. At least we had this discussion about what the rest of the world can learn from Nordic countries. I think in Nordic countries we actually have quite sound attitudes when it comes to antibiotics. We prefer not to use them unless we have to. I think it's very important to realize that AMR is not a threat to most of us, because most of us do not actually need antibiotics all the time. Most of us can do very well without. And I think that's one of the experiences of the COVID-19 is that viral infections do not benefit from antibiotics. People are much more interested now in getting a diagnosis than in getting treatment, which is useless. So I think there is nothing new about AMR, but we need to fight this idea that any kind of suspected infection needs antibiotics. I'm sorry to say, but it was actually a very deliberate strategy by the pharmaceutical industry back in the 40s and 50s to promote kind of a low threshold for using antibiotics. And we need to go back to a situation where we select patients. I mean, nobody uses chemotherapy just in case. You actually need a diagnosis first. And I think we need to get there as well. When it comes to how to achieve this, I think we have a very good experience in Norway over the last 5 years in setting with strong political commitment and setting targets. So in Norway, we had a target from 2012 to 2020 that we should reduce overall consumption by 30%. And we were already one of the low consumption countries. And actually, we have achieved that. So the total consumption in Norway has declined by more than 30% over the last 8 years. And similarly, we work in hospitals to reduce the use of broad spectrum. So my answer to that question will be strong political commitment, leadership, and setting targets. I think those are keys.
Okay, thank you very much. And Jessica, I'm going to put you on now and ask you the same questions. We've heard from Gunnar that a very strict political vision or strategy is one of the ways to use less antibiotics. Should we have a European policy on this and a strategy more united? And should we learn from how they did it in Norway?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a good example of how we can be a leading example from the Nordic countries. And as I said in my introduction, I think that it is important and necessary for the Nordics who have come far in this regard to share the best practices. And that's a lesson learned that we have to do. And we can really see that we are in the animal sector, for example, following the rules, but use less antibiotics. And we know that it's a good thing. And when we see the comparisons between the the EU member states, we can see that the Nordics are doing well. And I also think that we have to make sure that all the member states and in the EU follow the rules that are set up that we have decided together. And of course, I think it was what we have talked about earlier as well, but to raise the awareness of this issue is important. And I think it's even more important now when we have the pandemic to fight, that this is not anything that will go away, that we have to keep on raising the issue and be aware that this is, like you said, the whole overhead topic. It is a silent threat, and we know that it is not going away, and we can see that other diseases has not been in the same way during the pandemic, due to that we have not met each other and being better in hygiene aspects. But I think that it is a crucial for politicians to still keep this in mind and to follow the development and to highlight this issue.
Thank you, Jessica. And then we have more questions coming in. And I think I'm going to go back to you, Gunnar. So please pay attention. The first one is, it's two questions, and now we have to talk about the antibiotics used towards animals. The first question is from the United Kingdom, and it's Maria Lindberg. She asks, animal welfare and health, how to promote good practice on farms, still having antibiotics for treatment when needed. And we have another question in the same area, and it's from Lisbeth Kirk from the United States of America. How could industrial farming be changed to reduce risk of antibiotic-resistant bacteria? So in general, the question is, can our agriculture and farming do something so that the animals don't get resistance, or that they take among the antibiotics and give it to us humans? What do we do with the production of animals?
Well, I'm not a veterinarian, but I work a lot with veterinarians, and I can say that it's very the situation differs a lot between different countries. But it's very interesting that there is actually I'm strongly in favor of having good animal welfare, and of course animals will also need antibiotics for treatment of disease. To me, the big problem when it comes to agriculture is the use of all sorts of preemptive treatment, or even worse, the use of antibiotics for growth promotion. That is by law not a problem in the EU area now, but we still suspect that there is some use of it. I think it's important to realize that there should be, in the same way as we work with attitudes and perceptions among in the human population, I think we should target farmers when it comes to focus more or to emphasize infection control and prevention, instead of kind of relying too much on antibiotics to solve their animal welfare problems. And it's kind of a harsh statement, but if you look at the data from the animal side, there are huge differences between countries when it comes to the amount of antibiotics used per unit of biomass produced in agriculture. And there is no kind of biological or logical reason why it should be like that. It's a matter of tradition. And to me, I think it's a matter of differences in the emphasis on preventive infections by other means than just supplying antibiotics in the fodder. And of course, it's very important to get rid of all kinds of incentives for antibiotic prescription. And that is actually a question in the veterinary context, that veterinarians should never have any kind of economic incentive to prescribe antibiotics for animals at the farms.
Thank you very much, Gunnar. And before we move on to the next hour, Anuka Oyala from the European Commission, you raised your hand. Do you have a comment to this questions from Maria and from Lisbeth?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. I just wanted to get back also on the veterinary sides, because this is obviously very important and very much a focus in the EU at the moment. So there as I had mentioned, we have this new legislation on veterinary medicines and medicated feed, which is banning the preventive use of medicated feed, ban on prevention use of antibiotics in groups of animals, and reserving certain antimicrobials also only for human use. And there's also a measure that will be banning imports of animal products that would have been treated with antimicrobials for growth promoting purposes, or for the ones that are safe for critical use for humans. So this legislation entering into force next year will make a big difference in this front. And as I mentioned, this is one of the targets in the Farm to Fork. So this legislation will really help. And in addition, we will also, the Common Agricultural Policy is an important tool that will help the farmers to have more prudent use of antimicrobials. And there were recommendations from the Commission in December for the different countries of how to meet this target on the AMR level. And it goes into very much detail of how to do this in each of the countries. So I think this is very much in our focus, and we have quite a lot of action on this. And at the same time, we have also surveillance system established now of looking at AMR monitoring in food, which is also important. And this is something that we have introduced this year. So very important questions, and here we are really stepping up the actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inuka, and very good to hear that it's part of the legislation coming up as well, and that you have it as a focus point. And I could see that Gunnar was nodding to some of the solutions, so I hope that everybody is safe and sound when the professor is happy. We're going to move on to the next part of this webinar, and we're going to look on sessions on ways to accelerate efforts and explore links to the COVID-19. Again, all of you are very welcome to ask questions to the speakers, and you do it in the question and answers and the chat function. We are checking it all the time, trying to see when they fit in and who to put the question to. But I would like to move on to the pharmaceutical industry. We're going to go to the Anders Verlang. He's from Medical Lead Hospital Business Unit from Pfizer. And he's going to talk to us about lessons from the pandemic, new incentive models essential to get new antibiotics to fight AMR. So, Anders, welcome.
Thank you so much to the Nordic Council for setting up this important webinar and for the kind invitation to speak with you all. I'm going to see if we can make this work.
We can see that you started sharing screen, but there you go. We can see your first slide.
Yeah, I'm just trying to.
And I'm just going to be strict and say it's going to go from your time, Anders. You only have 10 minutes.
Okay.
There you go.
So, yeah,
please.
Perfect. Oh, come on.
We can all see your first slide. It's called Lessons from the Pandemic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Some of my statements will have been said before, but I think it's important to reiterate this. I can't seem to get my cursor over here.
Just use the arrows.
Oh, there you go. Okay. The very first COVID-19 vaccine was given to this 90-year-old lady in the UK in the beginning of December. And in February, we had more than 500 innovative treatments and vaccines under development to a pathogen that was largely unknown a year ago. And this large effort in R&D is crucial for handling the pandemic. And there are important learnings from how this is accomplished that should be transferable to the antibiotic-resistance pandemic. COVID rather quickly gave a sense of urgency because of the speed and the visible effect. And it's this urgency that triggered governments to take the necessary actions. It sparked a tremendous collaboration, as was mentioned before, in partnering between authorities and private industry, where resources have been made available to speed up regulatory processes and incentivize this R&D. And most of these treatments will never reach the market or even be used, but it's because of this incentives and the resources that are made available that you have this willingness to take risks and ultimately lead to the treatments we are so desperately dependent on. And it's the same sense of urgency and actions we need in order to handle the slow-moving and much less visible antibiotic resistance pandemic. WHO states that the high rates of resistance are seen worldwide. And National AMR strategies and actions plans, they can slow down the resistance development, but WHO anticipates that the global threat will only grow bigger. The Nordic countries have for years had a holistic approach to resistance prevention. We have surveillance systems, strategies for using antibiotics, both in humans and animals, like Gunnar just mentioned. And as a consequence of these good efforts, resistance is quite low, and we still can use many of the narrow spectrum antibiotics like penicillins. The figure on the left is a list that WHO publishes on bacteria for which new antibiotics are urgently needed. The two figures on the right are from the resistance surveillance systems in Denmark and Norway and show the resistance situation for one of the bacteria on the list from WHO. And while the numbers are still small, they show a clear increasing trend where we 10 years ago showed no resistance. And this emphasizes just what WHO is saying, that the slow-moving global pandemic of resistant developments call for constant need of new antibiotics, even for countries that have good strategies for slowing resistance development. This figure is an overview of the development of different classes of antibiotics. They, as have been said before, they revolutionized modern medicine. And during the golden age from the 1940s to 70s, you can see a huge development showing the dependence that was on these antibiotics. But if you look at the right side of the figure, there has not been developed new classes of antibiotics since 1987. That's 35 years. WHO continuously assessed the antibiotic pipeline, and they're stating that the pipeline of new antibiotics is not sufficient. There's, for instance, no treatments in the pipeline for 2 out of the 3 critical pathogens. And if we compare this to other areas of R&D, whereas you have maybe 40 to 60 antibiotics in the pipelines for immuno-oncology, there seems to be more than 3,800 products in development. So why are we not developing the much needed new antibiotics? Of course, there are serious scientific challenges in developing them, but the most important challenge is the economics of antibiotic development. The commercial success of a medicine has in the past typically been dependent on a combination of its volume of use and the price. But our growing understanding of resistance development has changed the way we use antibiotics dramatically. High use of antibiotics, we believe, drive emergence of resistance quite rapidly. And doctors are therefore encouraged not to prescribe new antibiotics unless absolutely necessary or to generally reduce the use. And as a consequence, profitability of new antibiotics is calculated to take 23 years or perhaps 10 to 15 years from their approval. And this makes it very risky to develop new antibiotics. And as a result, industry looks to other disease areas such as that of cancer, where the value of new medicines more reflect the return of investment. The red circle points to a figure that is often overlooked. It's the cost after a drug is approved, the regulatory obligation, if you may. And this has been estimated to be between 250 and 500 million over the first 5 years on the marketing authorization. And in just the past 2 years, 4 antibiotic companies declared bankruptcy or put themselves up for sale, despite having survived the process of developing a new drug. And when they collapsed, they took out of circulation or reduced the availability of 5 out of the 15 antibiotics approved by the FDA since 2010. And on top of that, several antibiotics are made available in only a limited number of countries and only in larger markets simply because the companies will not make money when drugs are used in low volumes or because they will be reserved until resistance develops. And this illustrates how different the antibiotics market is from other markets and the need to uncouple revenue of antibiotics from units of sales or use. And we need to develop new incentives that both stimulate R&D and secure access to newly developed antibiotics. And importantly, these incentives, they need to support our efforts to keep the low use of antibiotics. The incentives we talk about, they are often referred to as push and pull incentives. The purpose of push is to incentivize, stimulate, and reduce the cost of developing the antibiotics, whereas the pull incentives are given after regulatory approval, where the purpose is to reward the successful innovation and promote future R&D. And over the last year, several different push incentives have been initiated to support the drug development. The impact of these initiatives can already be seen in the preclinical pipeline. However, you're still faced with the same challenge that when these initiatives lead to a new antibiotic, there is still the challenge that new antibiotics will be rarely used and reserved until resistance escalates, and it will be very difficult to generate a revenue for the developer. So the solution is that we need a combination of push and pull incentives. There have been very few concrete pull incentive solutions, but just this year, NHS and ICE in the UK are piloting the very first model with the intention to stimulate R&D, secure access, and also to support AMR strategies. Other initiatives are surfacing. The Pharmaceutical Strategy for Europe states that the EU will pilot a pull incentive in 2021. But an important aspect to remember is that only if incentives are implemented in many countries or globally can they have the desired effect. To sum it up.
Thank you. You just finished before I made the sound. Do you have more, Anders? Because your time is up, and I have a question. Okay, because as a pharmaceutical industry, you are kind of split in between doing best for world healthcare and also making money. And you just told us that it takes approximately 23 years before you start making money, as that's how I heard it at least. So don't you have a moral obligation kind of starting to put a lot of research into new antibiotics now, because you now know, as the rest of the panels here, the rest of the participants here, that we have a huge challenge? Don't you have to be 20 years ahead and start now?
I think in general, like Gunnar mentioned, a lot of mistakes were probably made in the past, not knowing the implications of resistance development and using a lot of antibiotics. But the industry in general now really takes the efforts of working on AMR, setting up surveillance systems globally to monitor resistance, setting up stewardship programs, agreeing that we should all work in the same direction, not to provoke the huge sales of antibiotics. So the industry is really trying its best to contemplate this change, whether or not it should, or it's not sustainable. I mean, that's the trouble we see, right? The way that things are organized now, it's not sustainable. I mean, companies are pulling out of this industry. They cannot afford to do so. If they continue to try and develop antibiotics where they will not make money, these companies go bankrupt. And that's not what we want at all. So that's what we're stating, that the industry wants to develop antibiotics. They have the competency to do so, but there needs to be a market for it.
Of course that does. Thank you very much, Anders. And remember, to all of you participating, you can ask questions, because we're going to have two speakers, and then we're going to have 10 or 15 minutes to ask questions, and you can ask to any of the one that you've just heard. We're going to move on now, and we're going to look at the concrete suggestions for action in the fight against antibiotics resistance during a pandemic. And it is the Scientific Director for International Center for Antimicrobial Resistant Solutions who's going to be on now. Robert Skov, welcome to you.
Very much, thank you. We have one small problem here, because we are still viewing Anders' screen, so we have to ask Anders to remove that.
We will ask Anders to remove shared screen, and does that mean you have something to show us, Robert?
I have something to show you, but first of all, I would like to thank you and the organizers for inviting me on behalf of ICARS to this very interesting symposia here. So, if we're looking at the, so as the world has shifted its focus and resources to COVID-19, there has been, remove that one over there. There has been a upsurge of drug-resistant infections in hospitals, with outbreaks of superbugs in multiple countries, including Italy, Peru, and the US. Potentially causes included overcrowding and overwhelmed hospitals with the shortages of resources, and as a result, compromised infection control practices, leading to an increased spread of bacteria and other microorganisms. Moreover, antibiotics have been used widely in COVID-19 patients to prevent the potential co-infections, as Gunnar was mentioning. More studies have shown that between 70 and 75% of all COVID patients actually receive antibiotics, even though a bacterial superinfections has only been documented in 10% of the cases. COVID-19 has confirmed that a one-sided approach is ineffective for controlling pandemics, and it has highlighted that there is a need for the science to inform policy, but equally as important for policy to inform science. That pathogens has no boundaries, and that national efforts should align to global efforts, as well as global response needs to consider national efforts. And while most interventions are monosectorial, most pandemics include AMR. Most pandemics, including AMR, needs to have a One Health approach to be mitigated. LMICs are particularly vulnerable to the consequences of pandemics and epidemics in general. So just to say, if that's an acronym that's not well known for everyone, LMICs is the low and middle income countries. And COVID-19, AMR, and bacterial superinfections forms a deadly triangle, not the least in LMIC countries. And as Gunnar said earlier, AMR has long-term consequences that will not just disappear when COVID pandemic ends. And these consequences are not only national, but also global. So we need to act globally and join the efforts with the LMICs. To reduce drug-resistant infections in LMICs, there is a need for solutions that are both evidence-based, cost-effective, context-specific, sustainable. They have to cover the whole One Health spectrum, and they have to align to the national action plans. The Danish government created ICARS to bring a new approach to AMR mitigation, solutions created in partnership with LMIC governments and based on implementation research. ICARS is an international organization providing funding and expertise to governments and LMICs for mitigating AMR. ICARS is based in Denmark, but international in focus and staff, with 15 employees from 10 countries and still growing. We are in the process right now to become independent and with an international board of directors and looking for countries to join as founding as well as supporting members. ICARS has a different mode of performing research to create evidence-based solutions. And this can be visualized by comparing the traditional academic research, as you see in this slide here, where the research typically is funded-driven, and while creating both relevant and important knowledge, there is rarely any scale up beyond the scope of the research project itself. The ICARS model, on the other hand, is to conduct research with the purpose of changing policy. Research topics are identified by the relevant ministries and based on their national action plans. The projects are thus demand-driven and designed to change policy and to facilitate scale-up and executed by a multidisciplinary team from local research institutions and relevant stakeholders. We emphasize the need for a multidisciplinary approach, including social sciences for behavioral change, as well as economic evaluations. Here you see one of our projects in Vietnam, where we are aimed to produce the evidence that the use of the critical and important antibiotic colistin in the pig production can be phased out without compromising animal health or the economy of the farmers. The problem was brought forward by the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Vietnam, who is leading on the project. And we have worked with local researchers on an extensive project proposal, which has been approved at the end of 2020 and is right now launched. Another example is in Georgia, where we have a partnership with both the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Agriculture to address the overuse of antibiotics. both due to a lack of country-specific guidelines and regulations. On the human side, the project is building on existing evidence from the success and knowledge gained from other antimicrobial stewardship programs and uses the WHO AMS toolkit as the guide and evaluation tool. Local researchers, hospital administrators, and leading physicians are gathered together with ICARS in order to design interventions, and the implementation of the project is done in coordination with the ministry. So ICARS, you can say, is now opening for business. We were established only in 2018. We are currently receiving expression of interest from LMIC countries interested in collaborating with us on AMR mitigation projects. We are also opening to partnering with organizations working in the AMR space to join efforts on the ground in order to complement each other and avoid duplication. As an example of this, ICARS is part of the current One Health JPI AMR call, where we fund researchers in LMICs who are forming consortia with the counterparts from JPI AMR participant countries. Last but not least, while ICARS currently is funded in full by the Danish government, it has from the very beginning been the vision that other countries should be joining in order to become a truly independent and international initiative. We are thus seeking funding and supporting members who wish to commit to supporting the ICARS mission. So with these words, I would like to thank all of you for your attention and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you for saying that you want to take questions, because we actually have a question for you. We all know the price if we treat people with antibiotics, but now we've learned that a lot of us are getting resistant to antibiotics. So we got a question from Michalev, and he asked about the costs. What would be the average price of treating a patient that have antimicrobial resistance? So can you say something, Robert, about the cost if we have to start trying to cure people or heal people or treating people that do not take normal antibiotics? What are the consequences in costs in the healthcare?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So that question is obviously a bit difficult to answer because it depends on where in the world you are, and not the least which kind of antimicrobial resistant bug that you're talking about. But the problem with most of the reserve antibiotics is that you have to treat them by using intravenous administration. And that for many places means that you have to stay in hospitals. So on top of the antibiotic price, you have the hospital stay. And to make it even worse, while being in hospital, you actually are in risk of getting secondary hospital-acquired infections. So these problems here can actually be very big for some of these infections.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Not only the cost of the medicine, but also the cost of being in hospital. Thank you very much. And again, remember all of you, you can ask us questions in the Q&A. We're going to move on. We're going to go back to the European Parliament, and we're going to listen to a colleague from Margrethe Auken, and that is the Danish Christel Schaldemose. Christel, you're going to talk about two big threats to us. You're going to talk about the EU role in a global health crisis challenged by antibiotic resistance and a pandemic. We've got a lot going on these days. Christel, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mette, and also thanks to Nordic Council for making this webinar. And I think even though I have been working with this topic for many, many years, I still learn new things. But let me start by saying that I'm still discussing with myself whether I should stay pessimistic or maybe I should change a little bit and becoming a little bit a slight optimistic person when it comes to the fight against AMR. And when I listen to Gunnar Skov, I think that if he's a little bit optimistic, I will be that as well. I see maybe the glass as half full, because what we have seen during this pandemic is that if we want to work together and if we do work together, we are successful. a year ago, we didn't believe that it was possible to develop a vaccine. Normally it takes 5-10 years, but we have done so, and even several vaccines within a year, which is amazing. And we needed to do it because we had this, we are in this pandemic. Likewise with the AMR, it is a global threat to our health. And maybe it's not here and now in the same manner as the COVID-19, but it will become so soon if we don't do anything. And what we have seen in during this pandemic is that it is possible we can if we want to. So I think that is important. And that's a very important lesson learned. However, what is the EU's role? I think we need to lead, be a role model for the world. We need, every time there is a chance, in every international fora, every time we do something, making trade agreements, having meetings in UN, WHO, etc., etc., we need to have this extremely high up on the agenda, because we need to keep on creating awareness of the problem globally. We have it in Europe, we have it especially in the Nordic countries, but we need to have the whole world with us. And then I think we also need to give some directions on how to tackle it, and we need to do something about the misuse and overuse. And here again, we have several countries in EU leading the path, the way for this. We know how to tackle it. For instance, to try to unbundle the subscription of antibiotics and the sale of antibiotics. We have done so in the Nordic countries, and it has had a huge impact. So I think we need to learn, a lot of countries throughout the world, how to reduce misuse and overuse. And of course, we need to have a One Health approach as well. That is extremely important. Then I think EU can also do a lot of things when it comes to funding. We could lead the world gathering funds for development of new antibiotics. And here again, I think that the pandemic is a good example. If we want to go together, do it together, it is possible. We have put in a lot of public funding into the vaccines. I think we need to do the same when it comes to developing new treatments and developing new antibiotics. We need to put in a lot of public money in this. As we heard from Anders Falang, we need new incentives. I would say we need new business models. And I think some of it could be that we should put in much more public money, but then demand from the companies that they should not earn money on it afterwards if we are paying for the development, or at least not having the same kind of revenue that they normally have on medicine. But it is extremely important to develop new models. I can see you, Mette, so I know that I have to wrap up soon. So I just want to say, we can, if we want to. It costs money, but it costs even more money not to do something together. We need to research, we need more research, we need more funds, we need more working together, and we need more awareness. But if we have this, we can do it. It will take some time, but we need to do it, because otherwise we will in 10 or 15 years have another kind of national health threat like the pandemic we have now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Crystal. And you have to add one thing to your list, because we've heard now for the last 1.5 hours, we need to add speed. We don't have the time to wait. You said it would take some time. We have a question for you, Crystal.
Sorry, but Mette, I know we don't have time, but on the other hand, I mean, it's not as urgent as the COVID-19 was. We have a couple of more years, but we need to start working on it now. And then in 5-10 years, we might be a better place. I hope we are in a better place.
Thank you. And there's a question to you, Crystal, and it's from Helle Aagaard. She had a question already, but she asked, there are plenty of rules and regulations to reduce misuse and overuse in animals, but human health seems impossible to effectively address at the EU level. And it's because we have different national regulations in the different European countries. How can this be overcome?
Well, the European Parliament called for a change in this a couple of years ago. We said that if the development didn't change in a positive direction, also for the use of human use, we should then call for legislative proposals from the Commission in order to regulate this in the member states. So I suppose that I also thank the Commission for their good presentation, but I think we still have some jobs to do here if we don't see any changes, because if we don't get all the European countries on board, we will have a problem, as one of the speakers told us. It was Gunnar. when we travel, we also we will see an increase in the risk of resistance. So therefore, when we have the free movement for people in EU, it is important that we together work in order to make sure that people are not getting overtreated with the antibiotics. So therefore, I think also in human health, we need to look into this and maybe have a minimum standards, at least at the European level. So that is some of the things I think we should try to fight for. However, it would have been best if we did it by ourselves, but apparently we are not there. So I think we need to take the next step, and that is to take it up at the European level, creating a legislation that demands member states to act also in human health.
Does it also, thank you, but does it also have to do with the European history? I mean, we've been dealing a lot with agriculture and farming, and therefore we might have a lot of rules according to the antibiotics towards animals, but we have actually lacked a little to take care of the humans. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's true. It's a part of the history in the sense that that when we had the internal market, the common agricultural policy, it makes sense that we also had the same kind of treatments or rules for treatments, etc. in animals. But now we're even building up, the health union, and we're doing more in the area of health, and therefore the next step. And since this is a cross-border threat, I think it makes sense also in humans to make some rules here. But of course, we need to find the best way to do it. But I think this could definitely be one of the next steps in EU.
Yeah, and I don't know, Robert, if you're still with us, could you put a comment to this one as well? Have we been lacking to take care of the health for people and pay too much attention on regulation towards animals?
I think I hate, but I hate this competition between animals versus humans. I actually think we need to do the best in both sectors regardless, and instead of comparing and looking towards the others all the time. Both on the human side, there really is improvements to be made, as well as on the animals. But I don't think that we actually should make it a content of who is doing what. So in that sense, I would like to see both sectors really doing the most that they should do. But also, please remember, we need to take care of the environment as well. We need to be able to take care of AMR deposits or bacteria with antimicrobial resistant deposits in the soil, in the waters as well. So each sector really needs to take care of their own business, if I may say so.
Thank you. We hear you, Robert. Thank you. Each sector have to take care of, mind your own business. That's good. Pascal, we have another question for you, and I think I would like to ask it to Gunnar as well. Gunnar, if you can pay attention, it's about the vaccines for the COVID-19. And it's Helle again, and she asked, global equal access to COVID-19 vaccines so far have been a disaster, with rich countries getting access first. How do we avoid this for new antibiotics? Pascal, do you know how we do that? How we get all the vaccines out to everybody and not only to the rich countries that take them first or buy them first?
Well, you want me to answer how to improve access across the globe for new antibiotics?
No, yeah, I would like you to put a comment on how do we do with the countries that do not get the vaccinations because the rich countries have taken them all or bought them all.
Yeah, I mean the inequalities of the world are very hard to deal with, and I must say that the kind of the fundamentals of politics are very difficult to deal with when there's a lack of some sort of good, some sort of a resource which is in demand from everybody. So I think when it comes to the vaccines, we actually have a number of initiatives to kind of redistribute, especially as many of the richer countries have actually procured much more vaccines than they need. So then you can have kind of a redistribution mechanism. This was for the coronavirus vaccine. When it comes to antibiotics, I'm much more uncertain about how this will work. I must say that if I should look into the future when it comes to kind of the marketplace for new antibiotics, I think it is we need to move away from the concept of developing new antibiotics which will enter the same cycle as we have always used for antibiotics. Because there is actually, in my view, there is no limit to how many antibiotics we can destroy by misuse and overuse. There is actually a limit to how many antibiotics we can invent. We cannot expect scientists to come up with ever new antibiotics. So scientifically, I believe the new frontier is actually in a much tighter link between diagnostics and antibiotics and treatment. Because these very cheap antibiotics, which can be used very broadly in high volumes, I don't think there will come any new ones of that kind anymore. But I think we have a huge potential for better diagnostics, where we can develop more targeted therapies, which we can then use. And then, of course, when we talk of low and middle income countries, it's a huge order to expand that notion also to less resourceful countries. But I think we need to change not only the business model for developing antibiotics, but also the fundamentals of how we use antibiotics.
Mette, we can't hear you.
Sorry.
Mette.
Yeah. I know. Thank you, Christel. And I saw you raising your hand, and I think you might put a comment on how we're gonna give out the vaccinations towards the COVID, so that we make sure that all the countries get it, because that was also part of the question, or just a comment to Gunnar, Christel?
But in general, we are developing also in EU and with the United Nations programs in order to make sure that we will also manufacture vaccines for the COVID for also the poor countries, the developing countries. But this is, as Gunnar said, very, very, very tricky. But I think that when it comes to AMR, there are certain things we can do. Also, I mean, let me tell you a very short story. I at a seminar a couple of years ago, I heard a veterinarian speaking about, she was Dutch, she had a stagiaire from China. And after 3 months, she talked with this lady about what she had learned through the 3 months. And then this lady told that, well, at least she had learned that one shouldn't use antibiotics against headache. And for me, that was, a kind of an eye opener. And it was also used from this veterinarian to tell us that we have, really an issue. Many countries and in many parts of the world, they believe that antibiotics is the cure against every kind of a disease. So I think also, awareness in general about how to use what we already have, also trying to get people out of poverty, so people don't have to live together with the animals, etc., etc. So there are a lot of things we can do to prevent, at least, from this transmission of bacteria that causes also some of the problems we have here. So I think we can do, but it is difficult, and there are no clear and easy answer. We need to develop on the long run. We need also to develop a better functioning world. But it is really difficult, and I don't have the real answer for how to solve this. But we need, of course, to cooperate and maybe consider, But again, then we are going to the business model. Maybe we should also opening up for a freer or a cheaper licensing for products. But again, here it's not about the mass use of antibiotics. On the other side, it's in fact to try to avoid using it only when it's really necessary to use it. So therefore, here I'm not sure it's about cost. It might be about many other things. So we need to work on this, but it is a question we also need to take into account when we're developing scenarios for the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Christel. And then just have a quick question for Robert and Gunnar before we move on to, let's call it, the younger generation. Because in an ideal world, what would be your recommendations to the politicians listening? We've got politicians from the Nordic countries and we've got politicians from the European Parliament. Do you have a last call, good advice for them when they have to make new regulations? Robert?
From the perspective I'm presenting it today, I would like to emphasize that we are living in a global village. We're seeing that with COVID. We're seeing that with AMR. You saw the slide from Gunnar, how much reduction that we have seen in influx of antimicrobial resistance probably due to less travel. We want to get back to travel. So therefore, we need to take a holistic view and actually look at the whole world and take care of that we are developing AMR mitigation, not only in Europe, not only in the Nordic, but actually export that ideas to other countries, but obviously make those ideas context specific so they really work there.
Thank you, Robert. A holistic view. I guess we have to do that in every area of life. Gunnar, a short comment on a good advice for the politicians listening to this webinar?
You asked about regulatory aspects of this, and well, I've been working a lot around Europe and also in many different African contexts, and I must say that I think we should be very humble when it comes to exporting a kind of a Nordic perspective to countries which are very different from ours, both in when it comes to resources and capacities and a lot of other priorities. So what I have kind of ended up with is actually capacity building. I think we need to build capacities across the world at all levels of educational systems and both in healthcare and in veterinary sciences and all over, for people and civil society to be able to find their own solutions to this, because it is so, as Robert says, it's very context specific. I mean, it's easy for, even in the Nordic countries. In Norway, we stopped using antibiotics for salmon production through vaccination, and then we ask, why cannot the Danes do the same for their pig production, right? But again, there are many differences. So we should inform each other and give examples, but we should also be humble when it comes to understanding the disparities here. But the information and good practices should be spread around, and we should invest in capacity building.
Thank you. Sharing information and knowledge is always a good way to solve problems. So that was almost it. We have 15 minutes left, and we would like to move on now because the Nordic Council would normally like to reach all areas of the membership base. So therefore, we have asked 3 speakers now to give their view and reflections upon the messages that we've heard today on this webinar. And I would like to welcome the first one, Nina Sandberg. She's Vice President of the Committee for Welfare in the Nordic region. Nina, welcome to you.
Thank you. I would just like to start and to say that during this webinar, I am relieved to conclude that I have become slightly more of an optimist concerning the horizon regarding antibiotics. As a politician, I am even more convinced that in order to succeed, we need knowledge-based international cooperation, common goals and efforts. And our chair of the Committee of Welfare in the Nordic region, Bente Stein Mathisen, she was first on the floor today. She was arguing for the Nordic region to take a lead in the combat against antibiotic resistance. And I would just like to underline the importance of her message and maybe elaborate it a bit. 2 years ago, the authorities in Norway identified a pandemic and an acute shortage of medication as the single 2 major threats to our society. The Norwegian Directorate for Civil Protection emphasized that these 2 health-related scenarios both had a high probability and would have huge consequences for society and humans. So the COVID-19 pandemic was a fact only a year after, and we know that new pandemics will haunt societies also in the future. Then imagine a pandemic unfolding together with the severe shortage of antibiotics or combined with antibiotics resistance. Even if the Nordic countries are among the best in class, we in the Nordic Council are very much aware of the fact that we are part of a global village, as one of the speakers said today. So antibiotic resistance is rising to dangerously high levels all over the world. And In addition, the pandemic has shown the modern society's underlying vulnerability and interconnectedness. And we know that the production of antibiotics is decreasing at the same time as antibiotic resistance is increasing. And this is probably why they have been labeling this the quiet pandemic. The Nordic Council has had antibiotic resistance on the agenda for 7 years, and now we want to prepare and build capacity for the next crisis. It is essential to meet new challenges in a more coordinated manner, and we therefore suggest a collaboration on the production of antibiotics as well as on vaccines. So thank you. That was what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Nina, for your comment. And again, you can ask questions to Nina and the next two speakers. If you want, you do it in the question and answer section. Now I would like to welcome Kjetil Sjenstedt, I think, Chair of the Committee for a Sustainable Nordic Region from the Nordic Council. Kjetil, welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Mette.
Do you have any reflections of what you've heard for the last 2 hours?
Yeah, I'm representing the the Committee of Sustainable Region of the Nordic region. And of course, sustainability is a keyword for me. And I've heard some of the questions about animal sector and the veterinarians' use of antibiotics. It's of course rather important. And I heard Mr. Skov said that both sectors is rather important. And of course it is, we cannot make a fight between the human and the animal sector. But I haven't heard much about the nature. It's also a perspective in this because all these antibiotics landing in the nature. So sustainability is rather important in this. And I heard also Mr. Gunnar Skov Simonsen about the diagnostics. It's also rather important that we are spending the right treatment for the right diagnostic, and that we can reduce the need of antibiotics and also building capacity. And in the Nordic region, we are in the better part of the competition of this, but we also need to cooperate in the European Union, but also over to Great Britain, because they are also focusing on how to finance the way of finding new antibiotics, but also how we can treat this in another ways, diagnostics as an example, and building the capacity. So funding and incentives is also a rather important part of this, and is also into this sustainable perspective, which I want to stress. It's really important. So thank you for interesting hours.
Thank you very much, Kjetil. And we actually have a question that could be relevant for you. Now we have you, and it's from Chris Lewis in Germany. And he asks, is there a risk of AMR spreading due to lack of access to the appropriate antibiotics in some countries? That some countries have less access to antibiotics, and that is resulting in a poor alternative treatment being selected and propagating the spread. How can we get the balance right between the countries that have access to these antibiotics and the countries who have less access?
Financing is, of course, the key word here, also the capacity, but also criteria to get this, I think. And we should have a discussion about this, both the politicians and the medicines and the science, about which kind of criteria we can develop to get to this needs and the demand we all countries have, because I think there's we are too different today. And we need more common criteria to spend all over, I think.
Okay, thank you. And just one follow-up question. Do we have countries where we actually have an underuse of antibiotics?
And underuse, I'm not the man to answer that question, maybe, but if we look to Norway, we are not underuse, but we are spending very little if we compare to some other countries, even in Europe. So there's a big difference between Northern Europe countries and Southern Europe countries. But why it is so? Well, we need to know more about that, both politics, and also in the medicine.
Okay, thank you. Now we've heard within the last 2 hours that we've spent much too much antibiotics, and it turned out that we were all resistant. And now we're going to leave it up to the younger generation to solve all of this and to work out all the problems. And therefore, I would like to welcome the Vice President of the Nordic Youth Council, Kenneth Storm Jensen. You're going to be the one to solve all the problems that everybody have been, fucking up for the last many years. What are we going to do, Kenneth? The screen is yours.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I'm going to fix all of the problems, but I surely hope that someone is going to fix all of the problems. I've been listening close for the last 2 hours of this webinar. It's been really interesting. I've been learning a lot. This is a quite new topic for me, so I've really been learning a lot. And it looks like there is a big problem with the antibiotic resistance that we need to find solutions for. And what the right solution is, it's not for me to decide. It's let's use the scientists and the companies making the different antibiotics in the future. I think that we are going to have a bigger problem, especially now when the corona crisis is over. I heard some of the others saying that, and we need to really look on how to make sure that we will use as less of the antibiotics as possible, and that could be along with the doctors and the scientists. And also it looks like we really need to find a solution how to make new antibiotics. And that's quite interesting to see how we can do that in the future. Also, I think it's quite optimistic that the sales of the antibiotics had a drop in 2020, and then especially in the Nordic countries. But it's also really important that we try to find a solution how to keep them there, or at least that we use the antibiotics as a last resort. So that we will get less of the resistance build up. Also, it's great to hear that the COVID-19 crisis, it had renewed the interest in the AMR. Now we just need to keep the momentum and keep talking about it so we can try to find the solutions. And I know that we are not going to tackle this alone, not the youth. Everybody needs to take part in this, and we need to work together, and we need to work in some countries can maybe also work in others. Instead of, sometimes I have the feeling that different countries, they only look at themselves and they want to find the solution themselves. Let's work together instead.
Thank you, Kenneth. I have a follow-up question for you, because we've heard now that there are very different rules according to the antibiotics for veterinarian use for the animals. Do you have any suggestions on how to deal with that fact? How can we make the rules more the same all over Europe, for instance?
That's a difficult question to answer. I think, again, it is to learn from each other. I think that's the most important message here. It's that we need to see what works in other countries. And of course, that, we try to help each other. And I don't know what the right answer is to help. Yeah.
But should we start with the Nordic rule, or the common Nordic rules instead, and then see if we can agree on how to solve these things, and then we could perhaps take those things and ask the rest of Europe, hey, we've got this set of rules, could you follow these rules?
That could be a good idea. The most important is to fix the issue. So yeah, I think that could be a good idea to start, and then I'm sure that the European Union can learn some from that, and then use whatever they can, and we can get it wider and wider and wider.
I'm going to ask you the same question, and Nina, I'm going to let you have a last comment on it as well. Could a common Nordic action plan for the use of antibiotics be the solution? Ketil?
Yes, I can say that it is one of the solutions, but it's not the only solutions. So we have to build capacity, and this is also some kind of a cultural challenge that we need to understand why it is so and so. And of course, the common Nordic action plan is rather important, both of course for ourselves, but also for others to learn from, and that we can help others.
Okay, and the same question goes to you, Nina. Can a common Nordic action plan for the use of antibiotics be the solution as a beginning?
I just turned on my camera to say that I agree with Kjetil Kjenseth in that it should be part of the solution at least.
Okay. But as we also heard Gunnar say, that we have to respect that there could be cultural and national differences as well. Kenneth, you're nodding as well?
Yep, I just agree.
Okay. So does any of you three from the reflection group have any last comments? Now I gave the scientists and the pharmaceutical industry a possibility to talk to the politicians from the European Parliament and the national parliaments all over here. Kenneth, Nina, or Ketil, do you have any last comment that they should bring to the table when they make rules and regulations? You're thinking heavily. Nina, do you have a good advice, last minute good advice to the politicians paying attention to this webinar?
No, I just think that it's important that we have this kind of discussions and that we do this in cooperation, and that we are aware that the Nordic region is a part of the world, not entirely similar, and that we have a unique possibility to cooperate to shape the future. So I'm a bit more optimistic than I was at the start of the webinar. So thank you.
That's very good news that you're more optimistic than you were 2 hours ago. Ketil, a last comment for the politicians paying attention to this webinar?
Well, yes, I'm a politician, and in the parliament in Norway worked a lot with these questions. And I think this you have to work with this all the time. It's big questions, but my experience also from the health committee in Norway is that international cooperations is the most important. So we that's the best solutions, and the Nordic cooperations is important. It's of course rather important in that perspective.
Thank you very much for those last comments to all of you, and to all the speakers. Thank you very much for your speaks, and to everybody else paying attention, thank you very much for joining. As we heard in the beginning, this antibiotic resistance is a global crisis, and it doesn't respect any national borders. So we have to work together to fight it, and we have to work fast. On behalf of the Nordic Council, I would like to thank all the speakers and all of you paying attention. Thanks for good comments and good questions. We actually answered quite a lot of them. So let's keep up the good work. And for all the professors and all the politicians, you can go to work now and start working, fighting the antibiotic resistance. Thank you very much for paying attention to this webinar.